HotWired presents The Netizen.
Welcome to Netizen TV. I'm Todd Lappin, editor of the Cyber Rights Now section of Wired magazine. Are you having a hard time taking an interest in this year's presidential election? We don't blame you. This campaign season has seemed more disconnected from reality than any before. Nobody in the media seems to be talking about the kinds of real issues and real problems that we all face. We're here to change that. We're going to show you a discussion about the kinds of issues that netizens have been talking about. Consider it an introduction to a new way of thinking about the present and the future. We invite you to participate, both by watching this program and by joining one of our online discussions.
We all know the world is changing fast. The problems we face often seem impossible. Where can we turn for solutions? Not the politicians or the media. They never talk about the real problems real people face. Yet this is not a time for despair. A hopeful revolution is sweeping the planet. It is not a change in governments, it is a change in epochs, and it is transforming every aspect of our lives. This revolution is not being shaped by politicians or pundits, generals or priests. It is being shaped by children and the emerging digital society, netizens. The purpose of Netizen TV is to address the real issues the politicians and the media will not face, and to begin the post-political dialogue on rebuilding civil society for the 21st century. I'm Kristen Spence, Associate Editor at Wired Magazine, and the Netizen is defiantly not politics as usual.
1996 is the final presidential campaign of the millennium and the last election of the unwired generation. 25 years from now, will it make much difference who won?
I doubt that anybody 25 or 50 years from now will care very much about who got elected this year.
It's going to be like looking back at Millard Fillmore and James Cate Polk and so on, and there'll be the lessons of history that kids try to remember who were those guys who were running.
I can't think that either one of these guys is going to do us any good.
And if you just look at the issues that politicians talk about, and that the election campaigns are spent debating, well, yes, sure we have to fix the welfare system, sure we have to fix the health system, but folks, genetic engineering is barreling down toward us.
The Human Genome Project will have a complete map of the human biological blueprint by the year 2005. That means that in just 9 years, we could have genetic report cards that would indicate what health problems we could expect and when.
But I think what's interesting about 1996, and when people look back at 1996, they'll remember this election, but they'll really remember this as the year when technology started taking hold of American culture.
Welcome to the electronic frontier, kind of like the Old West, wild and unregulated.
There's a whole range of issues that relate to cyberspace that both of these guys are either completely clueless about or dead wrong.
Politics isn't happening in Washington. I mean, that's the theater of politics, and it's very, very distant from reality.
Nixon did very well with balloons, as I recall.
Wow. I think the real world of politics is already happening in the networks of the world, in the businesses of the world, in human interconnections, in non-governmental organizations like Greenpeace and Amnesty International and so on. These are the significant political entities already in that world.
I think that the old imperatives of the system have sort of swollen to the point where it has to burst, and where old politics have maybe reached the end of their natural life cycle, and the new political age has not yet emerged. But just like the new economy, we see its birth all around us and the signs that it's coming. And this is probably a year both to experience the old political system and the birth of the new political system.
Who do you trust more, your local funeral director or your congressman? Of 26 professions ranked by honesty, the public ranked funeral directors among the top 10 most trusted professions. Congressmen ranked 25. That's dead last, except for car salesmen.
These days, you probably learn a lot about the world around you from watching television. But does this media circus take the place of a real public policy debate? Do you believe everything you see on TV? Does it affect the decisions that you make? Does it affect the decisions that our politicians make? How does television affect our democracy?
I think, in fact, that there are severe indications of instability in our political system. And they range from sort of paranoid groups arming themselves because they hate the government, to just the massive alienation of the American population from the political structure.
In less than an hour, the compound that had fascinated the world for 51 days was destroyed.
And nobody feels represented in our representative, or what more accurately should be called pseudo-representative government.
Do you know the Vice President's name? According to a recent survey, 40% of Americans don't.
We left the notion of representative democracy behind actually a long time ago. I think the thing that has already happened to replace it is media democracy, i.e. the politicians play to the media, try and influence perception of what they do via media imagery. That's why all campaigns are media-based, not door-to-door anymore.
The rapid response war is at the heart of a campaign of tactics, where little that the candidates say, whether it is in their advertising, in their stump speeches, or even in their websites, is exactly true, and none of it is exactly false.
Well, you can control your message if you have the funding to do that, as it were. Just, as we talk about, it's a free society for anyone who can afford a printing press.
The Founding Fathers were terrified of democracy turning into mob rule. They were terrified of democracy working too well, so that the electorate could start to get government to respond instantaneously to whatever hysteria might infect it.
I think we've got government by the mob right now. I think that's what the media does for us. It inflames the mob. It generates issues that are non-issues.
Let's talk about the political story of the week, and that was Bob Dole's fall.
Without a doubt, the political process today rewards politicians for being short-sighted and reacting in the short term to things.
Republicans are talking about repealing a gas tax, while the Clinton administration is investigating why prices have jumped in the last 2 weeks. With gasoline prices topping $2 a gallon in California, a crucial swing state, the issue is fueling debate in presidential politics.
4.3 cents to some may not seem like a lot, but that's almost $5 billion a year in excise taxes.
A wonderful example we encountered this spring was the gasoline price increase. Okay? You had Bob Dole trying to cut the gas tax that he had supported a year before of 4.3 cents, and Bill Clinton saying, well, I'm going to release the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, neither one of which have anything to do with the oil market, none of which are going to have any meaningful effect, and all they were doing was posturing to the country, I'm going to solve the problem of high gasoline prices. When first of all, they weren't really high, and it was all about a media image.
The suspicion of terrorism is raised immediately by the stunning similarity of eyewitness accounts.
But I want to make it clear to the American people that while we can defeat terrorists, it will be a long time before we defeat terrorism.
Good evening. It's been 2 months now since TWA Flight 800 blew up in the skies over the Atlantic just off Long Island, killing 230 people. And tonight, for the first time, we may have a plausible explanation for the traces of explosives found in the wreckage. And so mechanical failure is now getting even more attention.
Domestic terrorism is down, way, way down. There's much less of it than there was 10 years ago, actually, but you wouldn't know it from the way the politicians talk about it and the way the media play it up.
There's this spinning out of control where it's one entity spewing ideas across this mass medium, trying to get our attention, trying to sway us one way or the other, and then soon we get tired of it and we move on to the next thing, and nobody ever really sat down and really thought about what was going on.
That's what's so dangerous right now with the recent terrorist acts and suspected terrorist acts, because we're about to demonize this invisible terrorist threat, and if we are not careful, it will be orders of magnitude worse than the Red Scare of the 1950s.
Would you give up your civil liberties so that the government can protect you from terrorists? According to an August survey by the Los Angeles Times, more than 1/3 of Americans would.
So do you blame big government? Or do you blame big media? Or do you just blame TV?
I really think that television has probably done more to destroy American democracy as a useful method of achieving political goals as anything that's ever developed here.
I think watching television makes people forget that they exist. It makes people forget that there are opinions and ideas different from the people in Los Angeles and New York who get to decide what's interesting and what's beautiful and what matters and what's funny.
This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
With Tom Brokaw.
With Chief Washington Correspondent Bob Schieffer. From ABC News. From Washington, Crossfire Sunday.
So TV has managed to create a map of the world for most people that is completely detached from the landscape that it purportedly describes. Well, you can't have the electorate occupying this fantastic universe.
The most significant effect, I think, is on our sense of time. That it has, in fact, divided reality into half-hour slots and 15-minute slots and one-hour slots, and that it accelerates and makes the population increasingly impatient.
More than anything, it forces us to reduce our arguments to very, very simple points. And that goes back to the idea that the analysis, it's very difficult to have analysis when you reduce a very complex argument to 1 or 2 points.
That feeds on the hysteria of the audience. I mean, it has a vested interest in generating hysteria because what it's doing is selling attention, and there's nobody more attentive than somebody who's in a, having a bit of a fit.
What we have now is mass democracy. It's the political expression of mass production, mass distribution, mass consumption, mass media, mass education, mass entertainment, mass recreation, and weapons of mass destruction. Mass democracy is no longer the appropriate form of democracy.
In a Harvard survey released last January, half of Americans agreed with the following statement. Politics and government are so complicated that a person like me can't really understand what's going on. Do you understand what's going on?
I expect that probably we should bring in Bosnia and Haiti to send poll watchers to help us clean up the election process in the United States.
Let's put it this way. The old media and the old political system tend to kind of wash out the diversity and the extremes of political debate. Well, there's a lot to be learned from the extremes of political debate.
Think about it. We'll be right back. Digital media is fundamentally changing the way our economy works, the way our information systems work, and the way our political structures operate. Governments are really losing the ability to control what goes on within their own borders. What we're watching, in a sense, is the decline of the nation-state.
We're moving from an industrial mass society to a third wave demassified, much more complex, much more diverse, much less easily, quote, managed from the top society.
What's happened is over 100 years we've built a very complicated system with all kinds of incompatible parts, and they used to use all these engineering metaphors, but at best it looks like a Rube Goldberg device. There are all these laws and regulations that not only try to stamp the life out of the economy and out of the society, but also contradict each other a lot of times. And so it's sort of grinding to a halt and people are becoming very disillusioned with it.
All federal regulations are listed in the Federal Register, which is 17 feet long and has 70,000 pages, and that's excluding addendums.
In the meantime, violence roams relatively freely in the streets of our cities. And what I see is the state is losing its monopoly of violence. It is losing its control over economics and is losing its control over information. These are the three elements of power in any society: violence, wealth, and information or knowledge.
I mean, what you've really got going on here is a geopolitical shift between the era of the nation state and the era of the global state. or the era of global governance.
Americans are affected by decisions taken by the Japanese Diet. Therefore, we should elect members into the Japanese Diet. And the Japanese have the same right to elect members into the American Congress. That way you begin to move from a hierarchical system of interrelationships toward a more networked system.
In the foreign exchange market, over $1 trillion changes hands daily. All of that money flows around the globe at the touch of a computer key.
Money flows worldwide and is no longer controlled by any single country. You know, the U.S. doesn't control the dollar. The world's capital markets control those dollars. The currency markets control those dollars. We don't control our stock market anymore. We don't control our bond market anymore. All of that is played out in the world marketplace.
There's nothing quite so powerful in a capitalist world as which way money moves, how fast and where. And that is the economic root of political action.
Global economy and especially multinational corporations in many people's lives have more influence than governments.
We know that that industrial revolution was accompanied by wars, civil wars, forced migrations, the breakup of family units, the destruction of cultures, and so on. There is no reason to assume that the arrival of the third wave will be less turbulent than that.
The process of change is difficult, but understanding that process goes a long way towards finding a solution. We'll be right back. Among those who use online media, we're seeing the emergence of a new kind of consciousness. It's a political consciousness. What we're seeing is the emergence of a digital nation. In other words, netizens.
The term digital nation is an interesting one because it is the first glimmer of self-awareness among people who are what I call dynamists, that is, people who envision the world as constantly evolving, being open-ended, rewarding creativity and innovation, and who like that.
What we're evolving with the internet is the nervous system of the planet. And if the planet has a nervous system that is highly developed, then the planet has a mind.
40 million people in 156 countries and territories are now connected to the internet.
There is absolutely a global consciousness emerging via the internet and digital technology. And it's completely unremarkable. It's here today with a small but rapidly growing number of people. But the big change is going to be not that there is a global consciousness emerging, but many global consciousnesses, plural.
I think people on the net, the kind of people that come to the Netizen site and discuss politics in the internet community and the high-tech world, do broadly appreciate individual freedom and really celebrate that and demand that and believe in liberal social values. At the same time, I think there's a deep suspicion of big government, big corporations, big power. There's a decentralization and a free market-driven economic philosophy that's very present as well.
A federal district court in Pennsylvania has called the internet the most participatory form of mass communication yet developed.
It's a massive leveling of the playing field. Everyone is essentially equal on the net. There's no essential hierarchy on the net. It's the strength of your ideas. It's how articulate you can be, how much you participate. It doesn't have to do with status. It doesn't have to do with power. It doesn't have to do with money. You know, everyone can play. And so in that sense, it's deeply egalitarian.
And that's what's interesting about the impact of digital technology is it gives a much larger pulpit to people who are passionate about things. It makes the process messier and more unpredictable, but it also gets a lot more people involved, and that's the essence of democracy.
Democracy is how people interact. Democracy is the rights of different groups to be treated civilly and decently. Democracy takes place in the workplace. Democracy takes place in the home. Democracy, it requires due process in the courts. Democracy requires freedom of expression, and so forth and so forth and so on. Skinning that down to voting and parties is in fact a ridiculous simplification.
In the last presidential election, just over half of all eligible Americans voted. In the congressional election, only a third of them voted. Did you vote?
So then the question arises, is the internet just a big soapbox, or does it represent some sort of real threat to the established political system?
In some ways, if people in Washington have a fantasy that people in the country look to them for a sense of community and look to Washington for a sense of political dialogue, then I could see them being threatened by the internet, in that people are looking to the internet for that now.
I think the technology is leading us down a path of a different economy and a different political system.
Clearly, on issues of electronic democracy and freedom, the power center is in Silicon Valley and not Washington, D.C.
All of a sudden, we have a flattening of structure. We have many voices speaking. It's very scary. How do I control it? From the point of view of politicians, and we see them in their relations with the internet, it's scary, it's chaotic, it's uncontrollable, it's democratic.
Chaos, democracy, it could be scary, or it could be liberating.